Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about decolonization, really in nursing. So, I did one really brief video on decolonization of the nursing profession, and folks seemed to really like it. So, I said, why not make a series out of it? So, for this month, I'm going to be focusing on decolonization practices throughout. And I want to just pause and say Happy National Public Health Week. And just a big thank you to all of our public health professionals that are out there, including myself, that do both community work or wherever you are centered. Thank you so much for all that you do. May you be celebrated this week. So, what we're going to talk about today is decentering the white gaze. And like I said, this is going to be a series on decolonization practices and hopefully focusing on the nursing profession. And there are so many aspects of decolonization that we can talk about. So feel free if there are other things that you want to bring up or you want to hear about to talk to me about that and let me know. Be happy to share more about it. So, have you heard of the white gaze? The white gaze is a term that was popularized by critically acclaimed writer Toni Morrison, who we adored. And when describing how it operates, Morrison said that it's the idea that Black lives, and I would be willing to argue that brown lives or folks who are marginalized or who have less power in society, that their lives have no meaning and no depth without the white gaze, right? So this is a term that I wasn't even that familiar with, and I'm just becoming more familiar with, but I know what the concept actually means. In the simplest terms, the white gaze can be conceptualized as the assumed white reader. So when writers craft stories or when we're looking at social media or the news, it is often towards a cis het or cisgender heterosexual white male audience that we're really looking for. The white gaze can be expanded to mean the ways in which whiteness dominates how we think and operate within society. And that's the part that really matters when it comes to decolonization practices. Being encouraged to adhere to white centered norms and standards is one of the ways that the white gaze operates. To create a world, and more specifically, what matters to me is a healthcare workforce that is built on equity. Understanding the ways that the white gaze shows up is imperative. So, how do we counteract the power of this gaze? One of the ways is to decenter it by centering Indigenous knowledge and practices. So, Indigenous peoples have their own knowledge, they have their own practices related to health and healing that really should be respected and incorporated into our education for our nurses, into their education as well as their practices. And because of the effects of colonization, which we talked about before, but just to expand upon it, native lands we know were taken. To further separate Indigenous people from their land, colonizers also reappropriated and renamed their territories. Did you know that what we call the United States is actually named Turtle Island by the Indigenous peoples of this land? I didn't know that. It's something that I've been learning as I cultivate my own awareness. One way that I decenter the white gaze in my actual life and my practice as a health equity education coach as a person is through my land acknowledgments. So when I'm doing presentations or workshops or sharing, I like to share this particular land acknowledgement. It says, as many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose lands we are located. So today, with deep respect, let us acknowledge that even in virtual spaces, that we reside on unceded native lands, and thank the indigenous people of the Turtle Island, which is North America, for their stewardship throughout the generations. So, decolonization in nursing involves listening to and valuing the perspectives of Indigenous communities' health practices, their knowledge, and integrating it into nursing curricula and practices. So, for instance, how might you do that? Well, one thing that I like to think to myself is what are some of the practices that I have as part of my culture? I know for my culture, for the folks that I have been around as Black and Brown folks, that we utilize spiritual health practices to cope with illness. And praying is often a means of working through the challenges of life and relying upon a higher power to bring the relief that we need. And these practices may be more important to your patients than the most normalized and even acceptable practices of taking prescription medications for illness. Structural competence teaches us that it is about the recognition of the economic and political conditions that produce health inequalities in the first place. That's what structural competence really is all about. And by acknowledging that historically these practices were the main form of healing available to Black and Brown folks because we were not allowed to utilize white hospitals, we can begin the work of centering the Black and Brown folks' practices. And by looking at other practices, we can begin the work of centering Indigenous knowledge and health practices. So, do you have any other examples or things that you want to share from your own cultural lens or things that you experienced growing up or comments? I'd love to hear what you learned about, and I'd love to hear what kind of work you're doing around decentering the white gaze. Thanks so much. Take care.